which I've done a lot of stuff that I didn't plan on doing too. I didn't plan on moving to Ohio. So yeah, who plans who plans on moving to Ohio? It's like, what is one of my bucket list items in
Right.
life?
I
I
plan
think I
on
want
living in Ohio at some point.
to.
As I said, no one.
Yeah. You got to keep in mind, Ohio is the home of the asylum where they shot the Shawshank Redemption.
Really?
Yeah, it's here.
Is that where they shot the Castle Rock Shawshank
Yeah,
prison
they
too?
use some of the. Yeah, have you watched that? Yeah.
I'm in it.
Oh,
We're not even to the first season. I'm telling you, it's got to be the creepiest thing I've ever seen because it seems like it's the backstory for Pennywise. I don't know.
I'll let you watch it.
Yeah, don't spoil it.
I'm not going to spoil it for you.
I think we should talk about Castle Rock because it ties all these, he's written all this stuff in Maine. And like, I swear, like, I don't want any spoilers or anything, but if Skarsgård,
Yeah.
I loved him as Pennywise. If he's not a troubled youth that's going to potentially be somebody living in the sewers, I don't know who is. Hey, everybody, we're back with Reading Under the Influence. We are actually planning an episode in the future to be fully intoxicated during the episode, but not today. Today is Super Bowl Sunday that we're recording this. So we're going to knock out some good picks for you today. And, we're going to start with one of the presentations that I have in that I think is really kind of cool. There's so many different things that can go into what makes a presentation. And sometimes they're even using metal cases. And so I'm going to go ahead and highlight this from Solitude Press. This is Breath of the Moon. And, it's the lettered edition of this from Solitude Press on nice metal with a magnet enclosure, and the book is inside. And I won't spend too much time on this because, in many ways, a presentation is going to speak for itself. But if you want more information about it, is Solitude Press. And one that sets itself apart from the others that I have from them was with this one. They also have a special feature where if you turn the moon. All right, we're going to have to re-record this.
Oh, there you go.
Here, actually, let me just back up.
Take 2.
Okay. So with this presentation, one thing that sets it apart, I think that's really cool, is that if you rotate the moon, it lights up. And it's even really cooler in the dark because, that light comes through this, and it's just a neat thing and definitely something that would get people's conversation going, particularly if you like the authors inside, but I'm not even going to get into that. And Solitude Press has done several with a metal case, and I'll just show just another one by them if you're looking at these. This is one that I think is really cool looking. It looks like stained glass. It's not. It's another lettered edition where they've put a color behind the glass and then put the etching. And this right here is and Hell Followed With Them. And I gotta love that title. I love Johnny Cash, but my favorite Johnny Cash song is When the Man Comes Around. There's just something. We've got Night, believe it or not me, but Leben, Keene, and Cooper. And this is another lettered edition signed by those authors, and another one that I think is really neat by the same people that made that other one. So I figured I'd show that as well while we're on topic.
I really like those, particularly the one where you can click the moon and the moon glows in the background. That's pretty awesome. I would probably be more connected with them if I were more familiar with the books, but the presentation is really cool.
You know what? Give me a minute to talk on that very point. So I'll say that when it comes to presentations, that there are times where the presentation is good enough where I don't even mind if the book inside is some content that I care that much about, or the authors are those that I have enthusiasm for. Obviously people do, otherwise they wouldn't be getting published. But when it comes to, me collecting, I am looking for things that I want, and generally that's associated with the author. However, with these from Solitude Press, I'll be honest, these are not stories that I've read. That did not keep me from being very interested in these. In fact, I got these from someone who I really look forward to us having on this podcast, named Tim, who he and we agree on a lot. We may not have the exact same interest in terms of authors, but in terms of the collecting world, I found that he and I align in many ways. And one way that we align that I don't with not a whole lot of people have the same excitement for is frankly what we call art as books. The presentations as art as a book is where he and I first connected in the first place, and where I've purchased some stuff from him. And I know that he likes some of the stuff that I have. In fact, I know that he's really interested in that American Gods, letter B. His last name starts with a B. That might be part of it. But I think that this presentation is not only a really cool metal case that lights up, but it also illustrates how presentations won't always, for some collectors, necessarily be about the author, which is an interesting turn.
Actually, interestingly enough, this has really struck me. The whole exercise in rebinding or rebounding a book is enticing the collector or the reader to judge a book by its cover. And I mean, I literally, when you showed that to me, the first thought is, oh, I want to read that. and I've never even heard of it before. Yeah.
So that isn't the first thing I thought of. And I think we both kind of have like this large pile of lists of things that we've had recommended or that we want to read. And so, it's kind of like throw it on the queue, pile it all up. Let's hope it just doesn't turn into a bonfire kind of thing. But absolutely, like one publisher that I hope that we can talk about more one day is Zagava, Zagava. And he does some great stuff, particularly with the lettered editions. And I think the only thing holding him back is that Tim and I, and I'm sure others, have not heard of these authors. If he was getting just folks that we were aware of, I think that, it's over in Europe too. So, I mean, I'm sure he's appealing to a slightly different audience in some situations. Hopefully this has meant people are starting to read new authors, because I'm certainly for that. That's a nice little second time that we go through presentations. And so if you don't mind, we can just roll right into Picks on the Rocks. And, I know you have another one queued up that's a classic.
Yeah, my pick on the rock is partly picked because I think it's one of the most interesting books, and the type of writing that it's a style of writing that I think very much epitomizes writing of the era that it was written in, which was actually it was written over a period of time and published in the early 1950s, and that's my screen's backward. Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And a lot of what's going on like in the world today with the Black Lives Matter movement, and this being February and this being Black History Month, this book just really spoke to me as like, we could talk about that book, because all the way through it, it's packed with metaphors about the experience of the African American man through that period of time, that is reflected in a lot of what we see happening throughout our society. And I know this book is another one of those books like Night. We talked about Night in the last show. This is a book that I don't think is typically read, not only in high school. I don't know that it's typically read in undergraduate literature classes, unless you're doing like a survey of African American literature or something like that. But the whole idea of identity, being seen as human, being something different than what you're being seen as. But there are some powerful scenes in this, and I'm not going to give anything away, but if you like philosophy, it can be that for you. Yeah, it could be a philosophical book when you read it. Definitely a literature major's gold mine when it comes to reading something and looking for underlying meaning in it from events that happen. Like at the very opening of the book, he's graduating and he's getting this scholarship, and he thinks he's being invited to be honored, and it's these rich elite white men. They entice him with a, without getting into all the details, what a stripper basically, and then they blindfold them and they put them all in a ring with boxing gloves on and make them fight one another. And it is, I've heard all my life white people talk about, well, you know, when they talk about racism, try to justify ideas that they might have by talking about black on black crime. And you've probably heard that too. It's always try to justify, well, they don't even like each other, that kind of talk. It was a very symbolic scene in which it explains why there's black on black crime in our society. And it's very systematic in the way it lays out that metaphor. Just really powerful. It's at times a hard read, but it's a good read, and it's not a quick read for me. It's one of those books that when I read it, it's always making me stop and think. But the way it deals with the racial divide, the way it deals with bigotry. Have you seen the movie Soul, Disney?
Oh, the new one. Okay, I thought you were
Yeah,
just
yeah.
yeah. We watched it. It's great.
The character in Soul, he falls down into a manhole. Well, that happens to this character. I almost think in the animated movie that's the whole manhole thing. It's kind of giving a nod back to Invisible Man, because at the end of it, that's basically what he's doing. He's down in this tunnel after he's fallen into this manhole, and he's struggling with coming back out into society again. This was my pick, and like I said, it traces his whole journey from being a black man in the South to Harlem, from starting out, in that battle royale, as it's called, where they're made to fight like animals, to the point of being. Well, let's just put it this way: some of the things, if you've seen the movie Get Out, great movie. If you've seen Get Out, some of those same themes in that movie, I think, give a nod, homage to the Invisible Man, or not the Invisible Man.
I'm
This
sure
is
George
not. Yeah.
Steele was inspired by Ellison and along with others.
Yeah. And this is not the Invisible Man. This is just Invisible Man.
Right.
No, not the H.G. Wells.
It's funny you say that, because generally, you don't want to have crossover in namings because you want to set yourself apart. But I'm sure that when he named that, it was, first of all, it probably wasn't even a concern. He was naming it what was really appropriate. But I've actually considered that before, because I know that it gets confused. And for me, if anybody who thought they were looking for the Invisible Man and ended up reading Invisible Man, sounds good. One thing I really like about this topic or ongoing, scene that we do with this is that I think that these choices will give kind of a look between each other and whoever's watching, into who we are by these picks, because in many ways these are our favorites. And so if there's ever a week where that's illustrated that we might be a little different, it's this one, because there's really no segue between your choice and mine. Mine, I don't think, will stand the test of time nearly as well as yours. In fact, I think that it's possible that mine is a phenomenon built into a bubble of time here, where 30 or 40 years from now, they won't really understand what the phenomenon was about. Ernest Cline, who wrote Ready Player One, I think he's about my age. I think he's about my nerdiness. The nostalgia that he is able to pour into it and then you feel throughout the book is something that is pretty much unparalleled in terms of my experience of reading. But I'm not sure that it's going to be the kind of thing where it's going to be one of those classics in 30 years. It might be. I'm not I'm not trying to shit on this at all. I'm introducing this as the second favorite of mine. And not to say it's my second favorite, but this is the second time we're going through this. And, I'll go ahead and say that if you're between the ages of, I'd say probably 35 and 55, you're going to like this book. And for those of you that are like me that played video games or love pop culture or just experienced pop culture at that age, because it was a different time. Our phones were attached to the walls, and MTV actually showed music videos, and you couldn't record. If you recorded something, it was on maybe VHS or something like that. You were living in the moment and hoping that song that you liked came on the radio. There was no Spotify. And so I think there's a certain amount of an increase in terms of how things were important to us at the time, because it wasn't just so freely at our fingertips.
You were sitting there with the radio on with a cassette ready to hit record.
Exactly.
So you could capture that song so you could listen to it whenever you wanted to.
In Nacogdoches, the KFOX 95 was our radio station that had all of those hits. And that was one time I knew when that my songs would come on, because that generally the songs I was liking then were in the top hits. And so they would count them down, and they would even have a giveaway for whoever called in and knew the correct ones. And I won that several times. Top 9 at 9 for all my Nacogdoches friends. Big shout out for that. Anybody else that won a free pizza to Little Italy, I want you to comment.
That reached about 60 miles away too, by the way. It's because some of us in a neighboring town used to listen to that as well. So
really,
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I believe it or not, I grew up listening to that too.
KFOX was only about 2 blocks from my house.
Yeah. Oh wow.
But yeah.
That's
hoity-toity. We have like 3 different editions here before I get into why I think this book is important to me. I've kind of talked about it a little bit, but I think this will also offer up a segue for future conversations, because this one looks a lot like the first printing, and it is a first printing, but it's a UK Goldsboro with the sprayed edges. They're not white. They call these sprayed edges with the color on the outside. It's not a gilting. It's just a color. But this was what the standard first printings looked like. But before that are advanced reader copies, ARCs they're referred to, but advanced reader copies that are sent out to a number. Sometimes they're sent to folks that have no plan on reading them. And that's often how they end up in my hands, because they are in perfect condition. That's really, as a collector, the only way I want them. But I think the main intention on those is to get them out into the hands of people who are going to read them and offer up basic critiques, or maybe even like notice some grammatical errors, but also to people that are part of the world of trying to sell this, the marketing world and media and that kind of thing. And obviously friends of the author are going to get those, but this preceded that. And so this is an ARC, and we should talk about ARCs one day. And then I also have a rebounded copy. This was designed by yours truly. I'm not going to claim that this is the most amazing rebound of all time, but it's pretty slick, nice blue leather. I think the only mistake we made was this is a little bit too cartoony for me with the VR thing, but the guy I work with really liked it, and I don't think it's bad. I just think we would have been better off without it. We do have an embedded quarter in here, which if you've read this book, I mean, I think, knowing the basics of what this is about, you would get why a quarter would make sense, but it's got a huge part of why the lead was successful in the end. And so this is a rebind of just your standard edition where, we've got different end papers, but on the inside, it's just like if you bought the copy off the shelf and then you take it and you put something else on it. So those are 3 editions of that I have on hand here. And, Ready Player One, when it was initially described to me, it was not a hard sell. And I am a very hard sell when it comes to using up, but I don't know, I consider my precious time in terms of absorbing books. But you tell me that it's about a kid who is living in a VR world, and he has to try to win a contest based on these Easter eggs, which Easter eggs in video games are things hidden by the people who created them. In the beginning, the first one was one where, you know, it wasn't even supposed to be found. Nowadays, it's something they just kind of do on purpose, and you find it and you go, oh yeah, it's fun. But he's supposed to find those based on somebody who invented this virtual world that he spends all his time in called the Oasis. But that guy that has passed away, he was my age and was enthusiastic about all the stuff from that time frame. And that's why I think that potentially this book is phenomenon and is in a bubble, because the obsession with you know, late 70s, mostly 80s and early 90s pop culture is only going to appeal to people of that generation, and, you know, people that have respect for that. I mean, because don't get me wrong, both you and I didn't grow up in the 60s, but we love 60s music. So, yeah, I'm not saying that it's not going to be enjoyed in the future. And, you know, when I put it side by side with something like Invisible Man, it's tough to justify that. But in terms of my personal enjoyment, I have been through this book 4 or 5 times already. There's a movie for it, which I don't hate. Generally, it's hard for me to not pretty much loathe the movie after I've loved a book. And that's not to say I don't like movies. I love me a movie. And there were differences for sure that I'm sure that purists really had a problem with, but I didn't. I felt like this was a movie that they created for a younger generation than is really loving this book. It's really more of a millennial movie.
Yeah.
But to go the other way would probably have been darker and not as mass appealing, and probably wouldn't be the kind of thing Spielberg would do. And so I get it. And it's not bad. It's really not. It's not bad. It's cute. And he's got Ready Player 2 out, which I really enjoyed as well. It's not the same, and that's good. You know, like it's a similar feel in terms of the book, but the story is just continued. It's not trying to be, oh, here's a new character, go through that whole same thing. First off, that would be absurd. So I applaud Ernest Cline for not trying to just cash in on Ready Player One that way. And he really did write a continuation of the story that is, it's got, if not the same amount, maybe more humanity in it than Ready Player One, which is just an extravaganza of nostalgia that it's truly enjoyable. I recommend it to anybody 35 to 50.
I think there is a connection though between these two books, because like the main character in Ready Player One plays through an avatar, right? It is a certain mask that he wears, a certain yeah. And there are these gates that he goes through in this journey to find. It is the search for the Easter eggs, right? Basically.
Well, right. Well, the end thing is the Easter egg, which
the end goal.
Find it, look for the keys that then open the gate.
But it's to obtain the fortune, right? The creator of the game's fortune, right?
And the Oasis, like and the fight is against having essentially corporate America take over, and we all know what it's like to have ads everywhere,
right?
You know, and avoid that.
You know, Ralph Ellison's narrator, I don't think he's ever named. He never has a name. He and in a sense, he is a way in which the author, Ralph Ellison, conveys himself through this fictional world to deal with identity and who he is as an African-American man in American cultures, particularly going through the end of the 1940s into the 1950s. This is right before the Civil Rights, about 12 years before the Civil Rights Act. You know, when you look at African-American soldiers who fought in the world wars to prove their patriotism and to obtain a degree of citizenship, there was this goal in mind that, you know, that if I show my country how much I love it, maybe my country will love me. And they came back and that necessarily wasn't the case. And so I think Ellison is wrestling with some of those things, but it is, in a sense, trying to find that key that will unlock what it means to be seen as a human being when you're an African American in the United States of the time that this is written. And I do think there's connections in that. We may have to come back to this at some point and have a deeper discussion about that.
I wasn't ruling out that there was
yeah.
I was kind of I'm skeptical on the timeless nature of this book as compared. And
Right. Yeah.
you know what this reminds me of is there's a book by Bruce Hornsby called High Fidelity that most people know the movie because it's the first time they saw Jack Black, and it's John Cusack, and they work in he owns and they work in a record store, and they are the biggest snobs possible, and that's entertaining. And I find that we will have a certain snobbery with our titles, particularly you this week. Just kidding. But like, that's the thing is, like, if someone came into the bookstore and let's say I had a brick and mortar shop, and they said, man, I'm looking for a really nice edition that I could, or someone else can enjoy, of Invisible Man, or if they say, I'm looking for a nice version of Ready Player One, I'm going to have enthusiasm for either person. It's going to be different.
Yeah,
I'm going to, that first person, to go, hey man, I'm with you. I'm not sure there's really been something that represents the strength of that book out there. Whereas Ready Player One has already had many and more to come. And, it's generational, but yeah. Watch the Super Bowl, and if we didn't influence you, hopefully the drink will. Right, man. Hey, have a good Sunday. I think this was great.
All right, yeah, you too. Enjoy the game, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. Go Chiefs.
We have a great show planned for you next time, so join us as we interview our good friend and fellow collector, Dr. J.R. Proctor. We have a great discussion with J.R. as he shares his views on books, reading, collecting, and a few insights on educational leadership. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe.